Hi kids, and welcome to my YouTube channel, The Cookie Club, and today we're going to be making cheese scones. Okay, so at the beginning of the video you should have seen all the ingredients, so if you get those all out and lay them out on your counter ready, and that way you can mix along with me. Okay, so I'll make sure first of all, of course, you go wash your hands and get your aprons on, then come back and start. Right, so our first ingredient is our self-raising flour, which I have here already measured out. To add that to my bowl. Oh, flour's so messy. And then we are going to be adding some strong flour as well. Okay, so that's that. Okay, once you've added the two different flours, if you just give them a gentle stir together so that they're well combined before we add our other ingredients. Okay, our next ingredient you don't have to add. It is called a garlic or onion salt. Now I have some garlic powder and some salt, so what I've done is I've mixed them together, but what you can do is just do a pinch of regular salt, just a pinch of salt if you haven't got the onion salt or the garlic salt.
If you use this, you might want to hold your nose because it's very stinky.
Apparently it's very stinky. I like the smell because I like the smell of garlic, but my little helper doesn't. There we go. So mix that in. So yes, you can just use a pinch of salt if you want to. Right, that's all mixed in. Beautiful. Now, our next ingredient is our fat. So our fat today is going to be unsalted butter. We don't need it salted because we've already added salt. However, if you've only got salted butter, then you can have that instead of adding your pinch of salt. Just use your salted butter instead.
You're probably expecting this in the recipe because butter's almost in every single thing in the world.
Yes, butter is in almost all our recipes. Well, either butter or margarine. So we're going to be adding butter. Now, we're going to be combining this and trying to make it into breadcrumbs. The easiest way I've always found of doing this is to grate it in. So get a grater if you're allowed to use one, and use the large grating part of it. But be very careful because if you run your fingers along them, they can be quite sharp. And if you do it really hard with your knuckles, it can scrape the skin off, which is not great. So if you've got an adult beside you helping you, that might be best. If you haven't, then you can just break it up into little chunks and you can add that to the flour, and that will work. It just takes slightly longer is all.
If you're really scared, you can ask an older brother or sister to do it.
That's right, you can ask an older person that's allowed to use a grater to do it. But it's not difficult, and as long as you do it slowly and carefully, there's no problem. If you get to the last little bit of butter and you're worried about scraping your fingers, then just scrunch that up and put it in the bowl as it is. There we go. As I said, this just makes it quicker. It's not entirely necessary. You can just chop it up into chunks, but it does make it quicker.
But if the lump is too big, then you probably want to ask an adult to grate it a little bit further.
Perhaps. Right, okay, so I'm going to scrape off the back of the grater. Pop that in. Now I have a few little chunks left which I don't want to grate because they're very small, and I'm just, as you can see, breaking them up a little bit, putting them in my bowl. Now we're going to rub together the ingredients, the butter and the flours, like this, and we're going to rub them with our fingers. Now the trick is to try not to get it on the centre of our palm, because you don't need to get all our hands dirty. We just need to use our fingers for this. So you can do it like this and rub it together, pull it up. Or you can do it another way like this. I like to do it like this. Rub the flours between your fingers.
And you might want to do this on an easy surface to clean off because flour and sugar are very messy.
They are, that's right. Flour tends to go everywhere, so you might have to do a bit of cleaning up at the end. But if you get a large quantity of flour come out of your bowl, then to pick it up and pop it back in. You should have a clean work surface before you start always anyway. I know you know that.
Because you don't want a bit of cookie dough in your scone recipe.
That's right. You don't want any mess from your countertop in your recipe.
Or an old chocolate chip cookie.
Yes. Right, so we're rubbing these together. Doesn't take very long, especially if it's been grated. It's already broken down quite a lot, and you're just rubbing it into the flour so that it's all combined into a breadcrumby type consistency. This isn't very breadcrumby because there's not lots of fat in it, but so long as you can't see any lumps of butter, then we are done. That's the last little lump of butter there. Okay, right, our next ingredient is cheese. Now, you can use any type of hard cheese that you like. The recipe that I have calls for red Leicester, which is like a very orangey type of cheese in colour. But I don't use red Leicester at home, so I'm not going to buy it just for this one recipe. I just have some cheddar in my fridge, so I'm going to use cheddar instead. And that's absolutely fine. Just use your favourite cheese.
Or you can use any type that anybody in your family likes, or if you own any cheese.
Right. So I'm just going to grate it using the same grater as before. We don't want to get lots of things dirty. I already cut up the right quantity of cheese, which I'm now grating in. Again, same thing with the grater. If you're worried about using a grater or you're not allowed to use a grater, get an adult to help you. You can't really chop up the cheese because you'd need to get it very, very small in order to use it in this recipe. So if you can get an adult to help you if you're not confident with the grater. Right, here we go. So after we've finished grating, we've got a few little bits left. We'll just get those in. You can always have a little nibble of the tiny bits that you can't quite get in. Or if they're very small, you can throw them into the recipe. There we go. That's it. So I'm just going to give it a quick mix to get the cheese thoroughly combined into the rest of the ingredients. Now, our next ingredient is chives. Now, this again is something that you don't have to use if you don't have any or you don't like it, but it does make a nice difference to the recipe. So I actually have some growing in my garden. I'm very lucky, so I went and picked them, and I'll show you what they look like. They're closely related to onions and garlic, and they have a similar smell and taste to very, very mild onions, and they look like this. And you can use the whole stalk of the chive. I've cut it right down at the base. You can use the whole stalk. And sometimes they even, at certain times of the year, have their flowers on them. Now, their flowers you can also use, not necessarily in this recipe, but in salads and things, or you can just eat them. And they're very tasty. I'm going to nip it off because I don't want any purple bits in my scones. That's the only reason I'm not going to add them.
For some people, chives might be a bit too strong, but you don't have to add them.
You don't have to add them, but they're very mild actually. So if you have got them, get a little chunk together, get some nice scissors that you're allowed to use, child safe scissors if you need them, and just chop off very little bits into your bowl. Can you see how much I'm chopping off? Just tiny bits at a time. Obviously not your fingers, be careful. Concentrate on what you're doing.
If you're using child-friendly scissors, you don't have to worry too much about chopping your fingers off, but still be a bit careful.
That's right.
Because it does hurt. Although it might not cut your fingers straight off, it does hurt a little bit.
That's right. You always want to be careful if you're using scissors, whether they're blunt ones or sharp ones. Right, there we go. So I've added that all through, and again, just give it a little stir. Now, all of this so far I've done with my hand. Aside from rubbing in the butter, you can do everything else with a spoon if you want to, if you don't like to get your hands too dirty. I know lots of children don't. So we're going to use a spoon for the next part anyway. So the last ingredient that we have is 100 ml of milk. Now, ideally you want whole milk. Not everybody has that in their fridge, so you can use any milk you like. And in fact, what I'm using today is oat milk because that's what I have in my fridge. I also have some cow's milk, but this works quite nicely with any milk really. The higher the fat, the better really, because it just adds the right kind of fat content to your recipe. But if you've only got semi-skim, then use it. It'll be absolutely fine.
And if you have high cholesterol, this is especially good because oat milk is very good for that. Although it looks creamy, it doesn't have any fat in it, that really.
Oh dear, yes, it's very true. Oats are good for people with high cholesterol, so oat milk is slightly better than cow's milk for people with cholesterol. Right, okay. It's a very random fact that my child knows there. So I'm just stirring it in. I'm going to do it gently because you don't want to play with these ingredients too much. Scones like to be pretty much left alone, and if you muck about with the dough too much, they end up being very hard little scones, and we want nice soft fluffy scones.
If you do recipe a little bit wrong, you might end up with bread instead.
You might end up with bread instead.
Or
right, a bready consistency, that's right. Okay, so as you can see, I very quickly, it took about 30 seconds, brought that dough together, and I'm not going to play with it. So on our surface we need to have a little bit of flour. So it doesn't matter what flour you use for this, it's just going to stop it from sticking to our surface. So a little bit of flour here, just to stop it sticking. We don't want to add too much because we don't want to add more flour to our recipe. It's a very soft dough, it's a little bit sticky, but as you can see, it's not coming away on my hand, so it's not that sticky. If it's too sticky, you can add a little bit more flour to it, but it should be perfect with those ingredients.
And you can use practically any type of flour for this recipe.
Practically, but if you use the guidelines that I've already given you, then it'll come out perfectly. Right, so we don't need to use a rolling pin. By all means, use a rolling pin if you want to, but we don't need to. It's not lots of dough here. It will only make about 5 or 6 scones. If you want to make more than that, then you can just double the quantities that I've given you.
Or if you have a big family, triple or quadruple then.
Yes, or a very hungry family like mine. Right, and then we're just going to pat it out until it's about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres thick on the sides. Then we're going to get our cutter. I should have said at the beginning of the video what size cutter you need. If you use it doesn't matter what size cutter you use, obviously. If you use a smaller one you'll get more scones, a bigger one you'll get less. Right, but I would use the same cutter for all of them so that they cook at the same time. So I'm just going to cut out, going right to the edge of the recipe. I'm not going to twist when I cut. If you twist when you cut, your scones will sink down on one side. They may do that anyway, but they will definitely do that if you twist it.
And scones have a very lumpy sort of texture once they're cooked, so it doesn't matter if one side's a bit up and one side's a bit lopsided. Or...
That's right. Now I've cut out 3 from that mixture. That's great. I should be able to cut out 2 from the next roll and 1 from the last bit. So I'm just going to gently bring it together. You don't want to bring it up in your hands and squidge it really tightly. Just gently bring it together like this. Give it a little squish and then flatten out again to make the same depth. You can put a scone next to it so you can see that it's going to be the same depth as your other scones. There we are. I should get 3 out of the first, 2 out of the second and 1 out of the last. That's generally how it works. There we go. So this has made 6. That's perfect. There we go. So to form the last one, I'm just going to pop the ball of dough in there and squish it down until it's the right size and pop it out. It's ever so slightly deeper. Don't worry about that. Okay, so we have our 6 beautiful little scones. Now then, going to be doing next is we're going to be putting them on a tray, which I have lined with a non-stick liner or some greaseproof paper if you have it, or if it's a non-stick tray like this, you can just put a little bit of butter or oil on it and use that, but I prefer using this because it's easier to wash. So we're going to gently pop our scones on. Everything you do with scones, if you do it gently, we don't want to be too rough with them. Now then, we'll want to brush the top of our scones with a little bit of milk. I've got a little bit of milk left over in my bowl. If you haven't, go grab a little bit more milk out of the fridge. You can do it with eggs as well. You can brush it with egg, but why use another ingredient if you don't need to? Brush it with a bit of milk and that will help the top go nice and brown.
You could even use different kinds of milk that you use for the ingredient bit.
You could. Right, at this point here, if you wanted to make them really cheesy, you could grate a little bit more cheese and pop that on the top. That's all according to taste and it won't affect how long it takes to cook in the oven. I'm going to leave these ones plain, but by all means add a little bit more cheese to the top if you would like to. Okay, so I'm off to pop these in the oven. Needs to be a hot oven, so you need to get your adult to preheat the oven to 200 degrees for a fan oven, 220 for a convection or gas mark 7. And we're going to pop them in for between 12 and 15 minutes. I usually find that 12 or 13 minutes is fine, but every oven is different. So check them at 12 minutes. If they look golden brown, and when your adult touches them, they spring back up, then they're perfectly done. If you think they're not quite golden brown, then pop them in the oven for another minute or two before taking them out.
Cheese, then you can do this recipe, just maybe add a different ingredient in instead of cheese.
That's right, you don't have to use cheese. You could indeed, instead of making savoury ones, you could make sweet ones and you could add sugar instead.
Some people might even make chocolate scones.
They might, but these are cheese scones, so we'll stick with that for now. I'm going to go pop these in the oven for 12 minutes and then I'll come back and show you what they look like. Bye-bye for now. Okay, so we're back. So those took 13 minutes in the oven and as you can see, they've come out a nice golden brown colour. And they're warm and soft and they spring back when you touch them. These have been cooling down for a few minutes on the side so that I can handle them. Don't handle them straight away, otherwise you might get burnt fingers. But afterwards you can. So, and then you can split them open and butter them, put cheese in, put pickle in, all sorts of things, and they're absolutely delicious. So I hope you've enjoyed making these scones with me today. Please have a look at the other videos if you'd like to, and like my video if you did. Okay, so we'll be back next week with another recipe. We'll see you then. Goodbye for now.